1999 will forever be my favorite year for movies, and the 72nd Academy Awards ceremony represented most of that damn fine cinema. Films that continue to last to this day, like Being John Malkovich and The Insider and Magnolia and The Sixth Sense. The list goes on and on. Even some of the more divisive movies of that year got nominated for something, like Titus in Best Costume Design and Fight Club in Best Sound Effects Editing. Now, let's be real, not all of my favorites from '99 got into the Oscars. Go, directed by Doug Liman, is fantastic and should have shown up somewhere. Three Kings, which appeared on many top 10 lists, shockingly got nothing. The underrated Man on the Moon didn't get into Best Actor for Jim Carrey. There's probably 20 more titles I could come up with I adore from '99 I feel should have shown up at the Oscars, but I know there's only so many categories, so many slots, they can't nominate everything. But for my money, there is one monumental movie from 1999 that should have been a huge awards player, from the Golden Globes all the way to the Academy Awards, and its stunning dismissal that entire season continues to baffle me to this day. It's a film I've seen at least 20 times. It's captivating, hypnotic, beautifully directed and acted and shot. It did well with critics and at the box office, and it marked the grand finale of one of the greatest filmmakers of the 20th century. I'm of course talking about Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut, released in July 1999. Many would assume this incredible movie was nominated at the 72nd Academy Awards, but they would be wrong. On Oscar nominations morning, Eyes Wide Shut was completely shut out, and it's time to talk about why. What the hell happened with Stanley Kubrick's final masterpiece when it came to award season? Why was it snubbed almost completely across the board? And what Oscar nominations do I think it should have received? My name is Brian Rowe, this is the Awards Contender, and it's time on its 25th anniversary for the Eyes Wide Shut Oscar fiasco video. To start, let's explore the project's origins. Stanley Kubrick was an artist very well known for taking his time. The Shining came out in 1980, and then 7 years later arrived Full Metal Jacket. He spent the next decade developing a variety of projects, including the film that eventually became Steven Spielberg's AI, but he kept coming back to Eyes Wide Shut based on the 1926 novella Dream Story. He thought about making the movie as early as the 1970s with Steve Martin or Woody Allen, but he didn't become serious about it until 1994 when he hired Frederick Raphael to collaborate on the screenplay, where the events of the book were modernized and Americanized, the film telling of a doctor who embarks on a strange late-night odyssey after his wife reveals she contemplated an affair with another man.
I'm not arguing. I'm just trying to find out where you're coming from.
Where I'm coming from.
Warner Brothers gave Kubrick the green light on Eyes Wide Shut, but asked for movie stars in the lead roles, and fascinated with the idea of casting a real married couple, Kubrick went with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. Filming commenced in November 1996 and went on so long the Guinness World Records recognized Eyes Wide Shut as the longest constant movie shoot, lasting all the way to June 1998. On March 1st, 1999, Kubrick showed what was reportedly his approved final cut of the film to Cruise, Kidman, and Warner Brothers executives, and just 6 days later he died of a heart attack in his sleep at age 70. Eyes Wide Shut opened on July 16, 1999, becoming Kubrick's only film to top the box office its first weekend, earning $21 million from more than 2,400 screens. Earning $55 million total, it became Kubrick's second highest grossing film in the United States behind 2001: A Space Odyssey. So what are the main reasons Eyes Wide Shut throughout most of 1999 looked to have a shot at some Oscar nominations? Here are 5 of them. The first reason was director Stanley Kubrick, of course, whose films throughout the decades had received tons of Oscar nominations, including many for him in a variety of categories. If you can believe it, Kubrick got 3 Academy Award nominations for 4 consecutive films. Best Screenplay, Director, and Picture for Dr. Strangelove, Best Screenplay, Director, and Visual Effects for 2001, Screenplay, Director, and Picture for A Clockwork Orange, and Screenplay, Director, and Picture for Barry Lyndon. Now, funnily enough, if you didn't know, his only Oscar win in his long career was for 2001: A Space Odyssey in visual effects. Random, right? But truth be told, Kubrick movies did well at the Oscars. 1960's Spartacus won 4 trophies, including Best Supporting Actor for Peter Ustinov. 1962's Lolita got a screenplay nomination, as did 1987's Full Metal Jacket. In fact, the only film Kubrick made between Spartacus and Full Metal Jacket that didn't get an Oscar nomination was The Shining, which I explored in its own Oscar fiasco video last year, and which ultimately came down to the disappointing reaction at the time from critics and audiences, and its, you guessed it, being a horror film. Eyes Wide Shut, on the other hand, was not a genre movie. It received mostly positive reviews from critics and did fairly well at the box office. There really weren't too many films released in 1999 until the fall season that looked to be big awards players, and Eyes Wide Shut for a moment there seemed to be an obvious contender, at least in technical categories. The second reason was Tom Cruise, whose films had enjoyed a healthy run at the Oscars going back to the 1980s. After his breakthrough in 1983's Risky Business, Cruise chose his projects well, often going back and forth between major commercial projects like Top Gun and Days of Thunder and more artistic projects like Rain Man and Born on the 4th of July, although it took until that latter film to secure Cruise his first Oscar nomination in Best Actor. The Color of Money earned his co-star Paul Newman a Best Actor Oscar, and then Rain Man won Dustin Hoffman Best Actor, and the film got Best Picture and Best Director. 1989's Born on the 4th of July also got into Best Picture and won Oliver Stone his second trophy for Best Director. In the 1990s, Cruise continued appearing in successful Oscar players like 1992's A Few Good Men, which got a Best Picture nomination, and like especially the film he made right before Eyes Wide Shut, 1996's Jerry Maguire, which earned Cruise his second nomination for Best Actor, won Cuba Gooding Jr. the prize for Best Supporting Actor, and became the only studio film that year to get a Best Picture nomination. When Tom Cruise left for England to begin production on Eyes Wide Shut, his movie star status had never been bigger, having just appeared in Jerry Maguire and the first Mission Impossible, with tons of awards clout to boot. Cruise and Kubrick together just seemed to make sense for a potential Oscar player. The third reason was Nicole Kidman, who wasn't yet an Oscar nominee herself in 1999, but whose critical cachet was definitely growing following her celebrated performance in 1995's To Die For, which earned Kidman a Golden Globe win for Best Actress in a Motion Picture Comedy or Musical, along with a Best Actress win at Critics' Choice and a nomination at BAFTA. Her dark comedic turn in Gus Van Sant's film was so acclaimed she probably was in 6th place for the Best Actress Oscar nomination that year. She followed that up with 1996's The Portrait of a Lady, where she again received strong reviews, the movie at the Oscars getting into Best Costume Design and Best Supporting Actress for Barbara Hershey. Her Best Actress Oscar nomination for Moulin Rouge and her win for The Hours were still a couple years away, but it just seemed like a matter of time, and her participation in Eyes Wide Shut gave the mysterious drama even more awards buzz. The fourth reason was the positive reviews from the nation's film critics and filmmakers, which propped up Eyes Wide Shut as one of the standout artistic achievements of the summer season, with more than 50 critics ultimately listing the film as one of the best of 1999. Michael Wilmington in the Chicago Tribune called it a masterpiece, and Janet Maslin in the New York Times also gave it a rave. And in a special episode of Roger Ebert's show, Martin Scorsese called Eyes Wide Shut one of the 10 best films of the decade. So yeah, there was a lot of love for the movie from critics and filmmakers, and it just seemed pretty likely during the early 2000 award season for Eyes Wide Shut to get something. When it came to the Oscars, nobody expected Eyes Wide Shut to get a Best Picture nomination in a very crowded field, but you'd think at minimum Best Adapted Screenplay would have been on the table along with cinematography and original score. Maybe even a posthumous Best Director nomination for Kubrick, because the fifth reason I would argue Eyes Wide Shut seemed possible for some awards love was the sudden death of its director Stanley Kubrick, and you would think, especially given the intense Oscar love he and his films had received going back to the 1960s, that awards voters would have wanted to pay tribute to one of the master filmmakers who ever was, with some nominations, maybe even wins. I mean, at the 71st Academy Awards in March 1999, Steven Spielberg gave a beautiful speech about his friend who had just passed away weeks before the ceremony.
He died before he could witness the century he had already made famous with 2001: A Space Odyssey. Stanley wanted us to see his movies absolutely as he envisioned them. He never gave an inch on that. He dared us to have the courage of his convictions, And when we take that dare, we're transported directly to his world, and we're inside his vision. And in the whole history of movies, there's been nothing like that vision ever.
Sure, you could say Kubrick's legacy was already sewn up long before his death, but still, you'd think the Academy would have wanted to give his very last movie something. But you know what? As you might have guessed, they didn't. Outside of a lone Golden Globe nomination for Best Original Score, along with 3 Blockbuster Entertainment Award nods and 3 nominations from the Chicago Film Critics, Eyes Wide Shut essentially came up with nothing during the 2000 award season. It was, in a way, as if this astonishing film, easily one of the best of 1999, didn't exist. So what the hell went wrong? Why did Eyes Wide Shut fall so very short at the Golden Globes and SAG and BAFTA and the Oscars? Here are the 5 main reasons. First, and most importantly, I would say, the frequently bizarre subject matter of the movie, which includes graphic sexual content, likely turned off enough potential awards voters. Eyes Wide Shut isn't a horror film like The Shining, but it almost feels like one, doesn't it? With its eerie tone and growing sense of paranoia, and especially that creepy, haunting sequence at the late-night mansion party, this film for many people was never going to be an easy watch. And when you add on the strong sexuality and explicit nudity, yeah, award season was going to be a little tricky for this one. Mere talk of sexuality wouldn't have been a problem, like in that mesmerizing scene near the beginning when Nicole Kidman's character Alice details to Tom Cruise's character Bill a sexual yearning she had for a naval officer, but I do think the long orgy scene of Bill walking through the mansion likely killed this film's Academy Awards chances. Some voters might have looked at it as gratuitous, and on top of that was the CGI controversy where after Stanley Kubrick's death, Warner Brothers had some computer-generated couples edited into the scene to minimize the most explicit content and obtain the necessary R rating instead of NC-17. This questionable decision struck some as messing with Kubrick's original vision, which did give the film some bad publicity. Overall, the unsettling subject matter of Eyes Wide Shut was probably too much for many awards voters to handle. Second, the long running time, slow pacing, and ambiguous ending also probably didn't help when it came to awards voters. Eyes Wide Shut is a film that rewards the patient viewer, not someone looking for obvious plot conventions or easy answers. Many scenes in the movie go on for a long while, sometimes with few cuts, a lack of music, intense focus on gestures and expressions and mood. Eyes Wide Shut is a gorgeous work of art that is extremely satisfying if you're willing to go with it, but those that don't go with it will struggle from the first scene on. I also think the film, with its long stretches of silence and unease and its unusual storytelling, works better in a movie theater or on the largest screen possible. Awards voters who first watched Eyes Wide Shut at home on a little TV, they probably moved fast to the next movie in their screener pile. This film deserves close attention, an ideal viewing environment, and a willingness to be open to a narrative that goes in many unexpected directions. I mean, that final scene is a perfect example of unexpected, weird, darkly funny, leaving you wanting more, and that's not always the recipe for award success. Third, although Eyes Wide Shut did pretty well at the box office, especially for the kind of movie it is, general audience members did kind of turn against it, giving it a D- grade at CinemaScore, an early sign that Kubrick's final cinematic outing wasn't going to be for everyone. Now, I know general audience members aren't Academy members, but there is something to being loved, like really loved by an audience before awards voting comes around that can make or break your Oscar chances. M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, released just 3 weeks after Eyes Wide Shut, is the perfect example. Throughout the first 7 months of 1999, nobody would have expected The Sixth Sense to be an Oscar movie, a modest ghost story starring Bruce Willis from a then unknown director, released in August, but it had such a visceral effect on audience members who chose to return to see it over and over again that it ended up getting into Best Picture and Best Director and countless other categories at the 72nd Academy Awards. General audiences lifted up The Sixth Sense, and it was rewarded come Oscar time, while many audiences rejected Eyes Wide Shut, thinking it was going to be something it's not, a Basic Instinct-style sex romp with Cruise and Kidman constantly naked. It seemed to be more a curiosity for general audience members than anything else, And when the film didn't meet their expectations, like when they didn't get the movie they thought Eyes Wide Shut was going to be, many people turned against it, and so ultimately Oscar voters followed suit. Fourth, that summer release date had to have hurt the film's awards momentum. We'll never know if Eyes Wide Shut would have received some Oscar nominations if it had come out closer to the Christmas season, but it certainly wouldn't have hurt. Now, granted, as is proven 1 year after the next, bringing out a movie with all the awards buzz in the world in December as opposed to September or July or April or whatever doesn't guarantee Oscar nominations, but I think especially with the Christmas setting of the movie and the lack of expectations for huge box office in December versus mid-July, and a full year of marketing and growing buzz for Stanley Kubrick's final film probably would have pushed it at minimum much deeper into the awards conversation. And fifth, one other thing I do believe hurt Eyes Wide Shut's Oscar chances was Tom Cruise's other big awards player that year, Magnolia, which was released in December 1999 in limited release before going wide in January. It was one of the final big award contenders of the year, and although Paul Thomas Anderson's 3-hour multi-character opus was certainly divisive for many, nobody could deny the power of Tom Cruise's magnetic against-type performance as pickup artist and motivational speaker Frank T.J. Mackey. His extraordinary work in this film brought him front and center that award season, winning Best Supporting Actor at the Golden Globes and receiving his third nomination at the Oscars. And so yeah, I feel like in some ways, Cruise's strong awards trajectory for Paul Thomas Anderson's movie allowed voters who weren't really gelling with Eyes Wide Shut to push that film to the side in favor of Magnolia, which also got into Best Original Screenplay. This was the Tom Cruise title everybody was talking about in early 2000, not Eyes Wide Shut, which allowed Stanley Kubrick's work to fade into the background just enough to ensure it wasn't coming for Oscar. Which to me is very sad because I do think 25 years on, Eyes Wide Shut is one of the best films of 1999, and it should have gotten in at the Oscars. I mean, you look at some of those categories and it's like, really? Really? We couldn't make room for Eyes Wide Shut? The Cider House Rules, I think, could easily be scrubbed from picture and director. Wouldn't Eyes Wide Shut look so much better there? Same goes for original score and adapted screenplay. Replace Cider House with Eyes Wide Shut, and the world would be a better place. I'd also take out The End of the Affair and cinematography, giving Stanley Kubrick's swan song 5 Oscar nominations, which it deserved. At the end of the day, 0 Academy Award nominations for Eyes Wide Shut just feels wrong. Like, in my bones, it feels wrong. But it also doesn't take anything away from this most amazing movie. I loved it at age 14 when I saw it in a small, crummy Lake Tahoe movie theater, and I love it even more today. Like all Stanley Kubrick films, time has been very kind to this one, and it seems to get richer with every viewing. The narrative is weird and fascinating, the performances by everybody, especially Nicole Kidman, are stellar, the cinematography is sumptuous, the score is chilling and unforgettable. To me, everything works in Eyes Wide Shut. Stanley Kubrick was an ambitious, uncompromising storyteller who proved in his final film he was still at the top of his game, and 25 years on, boy, this thing endures. This movie ultimately didn't need Oscar nominations. It just needed time. Time for its legacy to grow, time for more viewers to discover it and share it with others, time for all of us to continue watching and analyzing and debating and revisiting time and time again Stanley Kubrick's magnificent final gift to the world, Eyes Wide Shut. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think of Eyes Wide Shut on its 25th anniversary? Do you think this film deserves some Oscar nominations? We'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.